When I visited the world's best theme park, I expected a highly themed place with great family rides. And the first roller coaster I rode during my visit was Schweizer Bobbahn, and it met exactly those expectations. This was the first ever MACK Rides Bobsled, and it is located in the famous Europa-Park in the town of Rust, Germany. This 1985 Swiss bobsled takes up to 12 riders through a different kind of experience than what your typically roller coaster would, since most coasters have their cars stuck to rails in a fixed position, where a bobsled coaster instead rolls around in an open half pipe, which makes for a more chaotic and unpredictable ride experience. In my review, I will talk about 7 categories where I will give Bobbahn a score out of 10. These 7 scores will then be added together and divided by 7 at the end of the video in order to create a final average score. But first, let's look at the stats real quick. Schweizer Bobbahn is a shorter coaster at 1597.8 feet, which also means it doesn't need the most speed or height, which stands at 31.1 miles an hour and 62.3 feet tall. The first category is how it's presented and simply how good it looks in the appearance category, and a lot of the coaster isn't actually visible from the paths around it because of buildings and trees. You see most of it when you enter the queue line or if you are in the park's watchtower. The coaster itself is white with pale green support, which is the basic color scheme for this model really, since almost all of the others have the same. The track itself is then this half tube, and I actually think it looks really cool. The way the track is shaped is really satisfying to the eye, and when the train runs by, it simply looks cool. When you're in the queue line, you're also close to one of the helixes, and you can see everything, especially since you can go into a path section which is right in the middle of the helix, and the track is so low down, the train practically runs around you. It's pretty amazing. So I would say that Schweizer Bobbahn isn't a pretty ride. I don't think it has any beauty to it in any way, but it looks cool. It definitely earns points for that, as well as the theming around it. Enough points for a score of 7 out of 10. Now we know how good looking the ride is, but when it comes to a review, you also have to let in the ride experience, which we will kick off with the intensity category, aka the G-forces category. Now I will start by saying that this is definitely a family coaster, because it does not do a whole lot force wise. It's actually a weaker ride. Your first element after the chain lift hill is this big turn, which is just flat and kinda slow, and then you hit this dip. You won't really experience much else than speed doing this. You might feel some weightlessness closer to the back, but it's really not going to be anything impressive. It's just kind of an appetizer for how the rest of the ride is going to feel in terms of it being a bobsled coaster. The first real bobsled-like elements are going to be these 3 turns, which are kinda slow, so they don't give any forces, but you do start to feel some acceleration in speed as you go along. The transitions between them don't do anything whatsoever, they're just there. After the turns, you'll hit the first out of 2 helixes. Unfortunately, this is also just forceless. It's fun, sure, but it has absolutely no intensity to it. And the same goes for the transition and the helix after it. And then that is actually going to be the end of the ride. This really doesn't do anything in regards to G-forces, and as I said, you might feel something on the dip in the beginning if you're closer back. I was in the front row and I felt a very little bit, but it was almost nothing. In general, Schweizer Bobbahn earns a score of 1 for intensity. It's just not what you ride this coaster for, and if it is, I'm sorry, cause you're gonna be disappointed. Smoothness is unfortunately not anything Bobbahn will earn the highest score in either, and the reason is that the way MACK Rides build their bobsleds. At least that's my theory. You see, the track consists of these very thin pieces that are put together in order to make a full half pipe, and when the wheels and the train pass over each of them, they react from the transition between each piece. This means that the ride gets very shaky. Now it's not rough, not at all. In fact, all the elements transitions are taken 100% smoothly. The problem is that the train rattles like crazy. It's the kind of rattle that when you talk, you would sound like you're freezing your ass off. It's basically the kind of shake. Not all MACK bobsleds do this as much, but the Schweizer Bobbahn shake is just super annoying. I wouldn't call it uncomfortable, it just kinda bothers you. So I'll give Bobbahn a 6 for smoothness. It's not smooth, but it does earn its point for not being rough at all, just shaky. When you ride a roller coaster, a long ride is often a good and satisfying ride. Schweizer Bobbahn is not that, which we will discuss in the ride time category. If you remember from the intensity category, I did not go through a whole lot of elements. This is because there aren't a lot of elements in general. In fact, Schweizer Bobbahn is a very short ride in my opinion. You go through these turns and helixes, and when you're finally picking up speed and it finally gets a little more interesting, it stops. And that's it. I'll give it a 2. Just too short and too unsatisfying for any higher score. And there's really not much else to say about it. It just needed to do more, but it was the prototype, so it is what it is. So far, Schweizer Bobbahn hasn't really done anything too well. However, that is about to change in the theming category. As I said in the beginning, Bobbahn is a highly themed family ride. I also said that it is a great ride, but we'll get into that a little later. Schweizer Bobbahn is heavily themed, and I really do mean heavily. It is completely surrounded by theming. It is, of course, located in the Switzerland part of Europa-Park, and my god, the theming is just so realistic. It's exactly like being in the Alps, which I can say from experience in the actual Alps. All the buildings and the station itself is just exactly like it really is in the parts of Switzerland I have been in. And then there's the queue line, which is just so nice. You go through this beautiful area with theming and a little lake. There's just incredible scenery, and the queue also plays subtle yodeling music, which really adds to the atmosphere. The entire atmosphere is just as complete as it could be, I feel. It doesn't end there either. There's also theming during the ride. Now there isn't much, but still enough for satisfaction. When you really think about it, the fact that it's a bobsled is really theming in itself. But the other theming during the ride is also just a little Swiss building here and there. There's rock work, and one part of the track is eaten up by wooden supports to symbolize an actual old school Swiss bobsled. All of the theming is just so great and detailed as well. It makes you feel so much at home, and the queue line makes you want to live there. I'm giving Schweizer Bobbahn a 10 out of 10, because I think it's flawless in the theming category. It's really both quality and quantity. So I said earlier that Schweizer Bobbahn was the first MACK Rides Bobsled, which is true, but it wasn't the first ever bobsled, which we'll judge it for in regards to originality. 1 year before Bobbahn opened, Intamin, a Swiss manufacturer, opened their first bobsled roller coaster, and the concept is exactly the same as MACK's bobsled coasters. In fact, there's only one difference between the two models, and it is that Intamin has one car with several seats, where MACK Rides has a train with several one-seat cars, which can fit 2 people in. Therefore, I will give it a score of 1. 1 point for that little difference in the concept. If only MACK had been first, cause then it would have earned a whole lot more. Now I can finally talk about why I still think Schweizer Bobbahn is a great family coaster despite its flaws. Overall fun is the last category, and the thing about Bobbahn is that even though it is forceless, short, and rattly, it actually is fun. Even for me, and for children, this thing is a blast. So why is it fun? Because it is a bobsled coaster. The feeling of sitting in a car rolling around like you do in half a tube simply feels fun. It's hard to describe why it's fun, it just is. It has a specific feeling that other kinds of coasters just don't have, and I love it. It still is one of my lesser favorite coasters at the park, but I did have fun on the coaster. I'm going to give it a 5. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this coaster, especially the younger rider group, because it just feels fun, which is all you need for a family roller coaster to be good. You just need the kids to laugh, and they do on this ride. I experienced several kids during my visit who just loved it. From the queue line, I heard children tell their parents they want to ride again, and I heard kids laugh doing my own ride. And in fact, this was my 10-year-old sister's favorite ride at the park. Our final average score taken from the 7 scores is 4.5, which is on the lower side of the scoreboard. However, I think it's perfect for the ride. It isn't the best coaster ever made, but when you don't look for very much, a 4.5 can be a 10 out of 10, which I know for a fact that it is for some people. It certainly does have its issues, but it also does have its ups. I do recommend riding it if you like family coasters, themed coasters, or just want to try a different experience. But also keep in mind that if you only have 1 day at the park, you might want to skip it if you're an enthusiast and there's a long line. Well, that is my review of MACK Rides' first bobsled coaster, Schweizer Bobbahn. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below if you've been on it yourself. And a like on the video would be greatly appreciated if you enjoyed the video and would like to show your support. The same goes for a subscription if you want to keep up with me in the future, and otherwise, it has been Other Rides, and I hope you all keep on riding.